Hey Sherry, did you know that in New England you're required to disclose if your house is haunted or not?
No.
Yeah. Well, people are dying to work with us anyway, so we're happy to disclose it. All right, let's hear about it. This is the real story with Adam and Sherry. I'm Adam Hamalian.
I'm Sherry Hutchens.
And this is where two broker associates talk about all things real estate, apparently living or dead. All right, let's get started. Hey,
It'd be a
Sherry,
long podcast.
I know. Yeah. Why don't we talk about the market a little bit?
Okay.
Now, since you have been off for, I don't know, what, 4 weeks now? Okay, maybe it was only 4 days. Do you have a sense of what's going on in the market over the last week or so since we talked last?
I have been at Sea Ranch for 4 days and didn't think about real estate even once. So I have no idea what's going on.
All right. Well, I'll let you know. It's the same as it was before you left.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, we still
But
have jobs.
yeah, some exciting things. We had a couple closings. Um,
Yay.
One a Rossmore one that took a little work to get it done because of the Rossmore market, and then
Yeah.
another was a not exactly first time home buyers, but people getting back into the market after being out for a while, and
Oh,
just thrilled. Uh,
Elmhurst.
yeah, very exciting. So deals are closing, absolutely.
Yep. And people are calling. I got calls while I was up at Sea Ranch. I didn't answer them, but from people who want to have listing appointments.
Well, that sounds good for us.
Yes. Yeah.
People need to sell. And actually, that's going to be our topic for the day, but we won't get into it just today. But one of the things that is constant in the real estate market is transition and generational ownership. And so, whether it's due to a death or people moving to assisted living or moving to be near family, we're going to look a little bit at trust and probate sales a little bit later. But before we get there, why don't you tell me a little bit more about Sea Ranch? So, it's
Mm.
along the coast, and there's nothing up there. But tell me what there was up there.
So, Sea Ranch is a development of homes that sit right on the coastline. It's 11 miles long, and there are different positions or placements for the homes. There's Ocean Bluff, where you're right on the bluff, looking down at the ocean. And then there's some that's a little bit set back with a gorgeous view. That's what we have. And then there's one a little farther back, closer to Highway 1, which you think of Highway 1 freeway, it's a two-lane road, one lane going each direction. And then on the other side of Highway 1 are the houses that are set up in the hills, and they have different kind of views. Blue water views, not white water views, to use ranch language. So I think it was started, developed in 1974. It probably would not have been built today because the Coastal Commission does not allow homes to be built that close to the water on pristine land. But it's all of the homes are weathered. They are not painted any colors. The landscaping, if you want to call it that, has to be natural and look like what something would look like if it was just sitting on the edge of the ocean. And there are trails and hedgerows running through the whole property. And at the very top of it, north of it, is a little town called Walala. It starts with a G, but it's pronounced with a W. And it's about 2 blocks long, maybe 2.5 blocks long. And then you're on your way to Mendocino from there. It's one of my favorite places in the world, actually. I've been going up there for at least 25 years.
It just sounds very relaxing because one of my experiences was you were really unreachable practically. The phone service along Highway 1 is um, very spotty at best. And so it must have been nice to just kind of unplug and just be in that beautiful scenery.
Yeah, it really was nice. We didn't turn the TV on the whole time we were there, because you don't have to watch TV when you've got a view from the deck facing Black Point Beach and just watching the breakers all day long.
And wildlife? Any wildlife?
We did have wildlife. The first night we were there, we were visited by a fox that the guest book has named. The people who visit and write in the guest book have named Finnegan, and Finnegan has a spouse named Fanny. So we were visited by both of them the first night we were there, and never saw them again. But We saw raccoons, we saw a skunk one night, and lots of deer, including baby deer that were just
Oh,
adorable. So,
like still with the spots on?
still with the spots on.
Wow.
One of them prancing around, more bouncing than actually walking, just adorable.
Oh, how fun. How fun.
Yeah. And some of the it taught one of the people who were at the house how to use Google Lens so that when he went on his walks first thing in the morning when the rest of us were in bed, he could point his camera at. Well, first of all, it's wildflower season up there right now, and he could take his iPhone, point it at a flower, and look at it through Google Lens, and it would tell him the name of it, which is kind of a cool thing. So,
How fun.
yeah, I highly recommend it.
So, are the homes all part of a resort or they're individually owned or like how did you find the place that you stayed at?
It's been so long, I'm not sure how I found it or how I heard about it, but it's an HOA. Everybody has to belong to an HOA. There are rules, CC&Rs. There is a golf course running through the property, through the top part of the property, north end of it. There is a clubhouse. There's some really cool old buildings there as well. And I'm not sure what percentage of them are owner occupied and how many of them are seasonal and get rented out. The house that we have rented almost the whole time that I've been going up there is owned by a family in Livermore, actually, and they must go up there, to visit or to stay at various times of the year, but most of the time it's a rental.
Nice. Oh,
So
well,
yeah, it's really, really wonderful, wonderful place. Reach out to me if you want to learn more about it, and I'd be happy to tell you how to go about finding a rental up there.
oh, it just sounds relaxing. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
All right. Well, looking back to switching now from work, transitioning or from play to work, are you able to make that
Yes.
transition?
Yep. Thank you for holding down the fort while I was gone.
You're
I
welcome.
I could tell by the number of emails I had waiting when I got home that you were very busy.
Yes, it was.
So
Yes, I was
thank you.
running all around. It was, yes, I'm glad you're back. Let me put it that way.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Yeah, right. We got to pay the bills.
Yes.
Um, all right, well, let's talk a little bit about lean into trust and probate sales, which is
Okay.
um, it's kind of an interesting topic. It,
Yes.
it it ends up being a little bit, I wouldn't say like our bread and butter, but it's the regular business that happens
Hmm.
regardless of whatever else is happening in the market because it's
Yep.
just natural lifestyle cycles that you just are unavoidable. Um,
Hmm.
that and taxes. Uh,
Yeah. We deal
so
with those too.
yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what is a probate sale, and we should start by
Mhm.
giving some disclaimers. We are neither attorneys nor tax professionals, so we're looking at it through the lens of a real estate transaction. So we're going to try and
Hmm.
explain our real estate understanding,
Hmm.
which actually has some legal and tax implications. So
Okay.
please don't take our advice for legal or tax, and just general finance.
Reach out to us for referrals to attorneys who can help you with that.
Absolutely, yeah. Um,
So we have a probate transaction going on right now,
we do,
correct?
yes.
Could,
And
what is a probate
so
sale?
probate is when somebody passes away and their estate needs to be settled. And hopefully there's a will at a very minimum. And in certain circumstances, and most of the people that we work with have a trust
Hmm.
and that they own their home in a trust. But if they don't
Hmm.
own their home in a trust, and we'll come back to that, then a probate court, probate judge that administers to make sure that that will, or in the absence of a will, the estate is being settled in accordance with law and the wishes of the person who owned it. And so probate is I'm trying I guess I don't even know the legal definition of it, but
Hmm.
it's in my mind, I think about it being kind of like escrow, where it's you go into
Hmm.
probate, the judge oversees it. You bring here are the assets, here's the will, and then there's some direction given to an establishment of the who's in charge of settling the probate. So is it
Is it probation? Does it come from that, a
uh,
probationary period?
maybe that's interesting. I'll have to look that up. I don't know. But one of the first things to establish is who is going to be the person in charge of dealing with the person's estate. So it could be an administrator, and it
Mhm,
could be a trustee if it's a trust,
mhm,
and sometimes it's an executor. So somebody who's executing the will of the will. Though some of those definitions are a little muddy and they cross over, and there's some legal distinctions, but function wise, they operate the same way. Um,
So let's clarify that just for a minute. A trustee or an administrator or an executor make sure that the wishes of the homeowner or the estate holder are fulfilled, correct?
that's right.
Okay.
And in the case of a trust, typically a judge doesn't need to oversee it unless there's something being contested. But in the case of a will, or if there's no will, then a judge approves that administrator or executive, or
Mhm,
assigns or elects that person.
mhm,
Then, depending upon whether it's the number of the value of the assets, and what the will says, and so forth, either the judge could say, "All right, Mr. Executor, Mrs. Executor, you have sufficient right to deal with the transaction, deal with the property, the assets, whether it's cash
mhm,
or a house that needs to be sold. Go
mhm,
ahead and sell it, and then come back to me and tell me how you've dealt with the money." In
mhm.
other circumstances, the judge says, "No, there's enough ambiguity here. I want to approve the sale when it comes because there's enough competing values or interests that need to be looked out for."
Mhm,
So the judge retains some of that authority. So,
mhm.
um,
That would be for more than just one home, for example, right? It would be more, it could be homes, it could be funds, money that's sitting in accounts, it could be investments, it could be
right, right.
jewelry, it could be any asset.
Sometimes we interact with clients who the judge has told them, "You may not sell anything. You have to keep everything in the house until every possible beneficiary is notified and has a right to say," because it's not just that it might have monetary value, it might have sentimental value. And so
Yeah,
the cousin who was, maybe it's grandparents' estate, and so is bypassing the parent generation down to grandkids, and they might be cousins who are not all in the same place, or maybe not even in current relations. And
right.
so everybody might say, "I'd really like to have my grandfather's saw or drill or some personal item." So sometimes the as it's not just a monetary division; it's also a possession. So
Right.
we don't really deal with most of that. That is really well beyond our scope of understanding that we interact with that.
Hmm.
Really, where we come into play is when the trustee, the executor, the administrator has been given permission to sell a house, and that's when they call us.
Yep. Yep.
So, what are some things that we run into? So, we have this probate sale. There's more than one beneficiary, and they have passed the responsibility of the executor of or the administrator of the probate back and forth between the siblings.
Mhm.
And so, what happens? How do we jump into that situation and help that client have
Mhm.
this result?
Well, the way we help them is to follow the letter of the court order. Usually there's a court order involved and it stipulates very clearly what needs to be done. In this case, the house needs to be sold. And it tells us whether or not the court needs to approve the sale. So in this case, it does not need court approval. It's a fairly simple sale. It's a townhouse, um, kind of entry level pricing for Walnut Creek, California. And our goal is to sell it for the highest and best price. We can't just give it away just because it's a probate sale. It's not a throwaway thing. Our role is still to get the maximum value. Um, The administrator is a person who is taking care of the sale at the via court order. I guess that person likely never lived there, oftentimes has never lived there. In this case, I don't think that person ever lived there. And he's carrying out the wishes of, it's not really who the homeowner was. The homeowner died without a will or a trust, right? So that's what makes it a probate sale. And the court goes out and finds the next of kin who, are the likely beneficiaries of the sale. And then it moves forward from there. And our role is, what our role usually is, get the house ready, sell it, close escrow.
Yeah. So some of the things that are different with a probate sale, I mean, obviously it's not uncommon for there to be more than one buyer or more than one seller
Hmm.
in a transaction, but usually they're husband and wife in the most case scenario.
Yep.
In the case of a probate sale and trust sales as well, there's typically more than one, I'll say client for lack of a better word.
Hmm.
And one of our jobs is just to be as transparent and have as clear a communication as possible
Hmm.
on every level, because sometimes we have one point of contact, but they have to go back to multiple family members and say, hey, this is what the real estate agent is selling.
Yeah.
And so it's our job to put it down in writing and put it in a clear enough communication that it could be sent to all the stakeholders. That's the word I was
Yeah.
looking for earlier, all the stakeholders,
Yep.
whether that's siblings or cousins or grandchildren, or really at the end of the day, the judge who's overseeing it. We want to make sure that there's no question about the recommendations that we've done.
Hmm.
The other kind of challenge, so clear communication is one of the things we do. The other
Yep.
challenge is oftentimes there's not resources to prepare the house properly. And there's a couple factors there. And usually what is tied to it is there might not have been any cash in the estate to begin with. And then two, getting a collection of people who have diverging values to agree to spend money is a little bit harder. So not going to talk about our current case because that would get into their situation too specifically, but it can be a challenge to get a house ready that has been in somebody's possession, say for the last 20 years of their life, and having diminishing ability to keep things up. So typically they feel very dated. We can polish it up and clean it, but it's hard to take care of some of those deficiencies.
Yeah.
When it's a trust and there's a clear trustee, oftentimes that's a little bit easier. Not specifically that the trust means that there's cash involved, but usually somebody who's doing that kind of financial planning with a trust also has some other resources that have been set aside, not for the resale of their home, but
Right.
to be able to pass on.
Right. And not only diverging values when it comes to selling a piece of property, likely owned by a loved one at some point, but also diverging goals. Emotions come into play. We've had situations where, several of the siblings want to sell and one doesn't because they're emotionally attached to it and can't let go. Um, and so that always, I guess, makes it a little more complicated to fulfill the goals, especially if it's a probate, fulfill the goals of the court order.
You know,
So,
one of the things that's the best tool for a real estate agent to have in this position is curiosity, and
mhm,
to ask open-ended questions and let people tell their narrative. Because when they
mhm,
tell their narrative, we can often hear some things that maybe they don't start with that are important to help us.
mhm,
Sometimes it has to do with understanding the secondary stakeholders' values that we can attend to if we know about it. It
mhm,
makes it easier on the administrator because they're not put in between us and the other stakeholders, and we can balance some of those values out as we're looking. So some of that might be the timeline of the sale, how quickly it needs to happen. Usually cash, the sales price is the most important for all sellers, but there
mhm,
might be some other dynamics.
mhm,
I had a transaction a few years ago. It was just before you and I were partnering, where there were three siblings who inherited a property, and two of them lived locally and one lived farther away. And the one that lived farther away was using the family home kind of like a hotel. Like she would come into town, she'd stay in the family house, she'd go through some of the boxes a little at a time. And it was
Mhm.
going on 5 years. And finally, the siblings said, "This is enough. We need to sell the house. We
Yeah.
can't, enough is the time." So, in that particular case, it was helping the one person who was coming from a distant, helping them like, all right, how can we help you go through your mom and dad's belongings in a way that is honoring of your parents? Because that's sometimes the agenda is
Yeah.
how do we honor my parents? I don't want to just put everything that they owned into the dumpster.
Right.
I, my brother and I kind of did that when my dad died. Not exactly, but my dad was a hoarder. I mean, like almost clinically hoarder. I mean, when he passed away, my poor mom was living with all of his stuff, and my brother and I had three dumpsters full of stuff that we just loaded stuff out of the backyard and out of the garage and out of the lower family room. Uh,
Three.
yeah, and that doesn't include the scrap metal only truckload that went. And so
Wow.
my dad didn't know that going to the dump was a one-way trip. I was because of the Alameda listing. We drove past the Mount Trashmore in Alameda. I mean, we don't have it's not a dump anymore. We're not allowed to have those locally. But my dad would go over there and he'd put his stuff down and like, oh, there's a perfectly good ladder, and put the ladder on his truck and bring it home. Oh, look, there's a perfectly good wheelbarrow. Put it on his truck and bring it home. I mean, I
Even if he already had a ladder and a wheelbarrow.
absolutely because it
Oh,
had
wow.
value. I mean, he was the
Oh,
Depression era kid, right? I mean, he
yeah.
learned to straighten nails rather because going and buying new nails wasn't. So,
Yes.
my brother and I had some of it. There were some things that were really interesting. Like he had a box full of antique candlestick telephones, like probably 10 of them. Um,
Antique candlestick telephones.
the ones like this you hold to your ear and you hold.
Oh. Oh, I didn't know that's what those were called.
Yeah, maybe that's not the right. That's what we called them. Who knows,
Uh-huh.
right? So what we did, this was in Alameda. So what we did is we called, we posted on Free Cycle and on Facebook, and we would put stuff that we thought somebody might like on the driveway, and then while we were putting other stuff in the dumpster, and people had just came and took almost everything, and some people were going into the dumpster and grabbing stuff out of there that we were throwing away.
Oh, wow.
Um, it can be overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so when we coming back to, when we're working with clients, we joke sometimes that one of the realtors wear a lot of hats, and one of the hats is getting rid of other people's junk. Uh,
Yeah.
and sometimes
Uh-huh.
people don't want to see what happens to their parents' belongings,
Yeah.
and we will assist sometimes, try and help give things away. But and I know you hate this and you resist it at all costs. You work much harder than I do to give things away. But
Yeah.
sometimes at the end of the day, you just need to call the hauler to come just haul it
Yeah.
out.
Well, we just try every possibility to find a home for things before we resort to, calling the hauler to take care of it. Because there are some things that, I mean, we had a house in Walnut Creek a couple years ago, and the guy had a $10,000 desk that was not that old. And the reason we knew it was a $10,000 desk because the receipt was in the drawer.
Yeah,
He died suddenly. Certainly wouldn't have bought a $10,000 desk if he knew he was going to pass away. And I think there were a lot of things in that house. He had nice taste, and we dragged everything out to the driveway and took pictures of it and put it on Facebook Marketplace and said free, come and get it. And we got rid of everything except one chair, including that $10,000 desk. Nobody was going to pay for it. We knew that. We know nobody pays for furniture nowadays, but they might come and pick it up, and that's exactly what happened. So. I just could not imagine that man, somehow knowing that we had taken his $10,000 desk to the dump. It just wasn't not going to happen on my watch. So,
yeah, no, yeah, I'm glad somebody's using that. The
yeah.
probably the one most surprising, or maybe not surprising, very common unwanted gift is grandma's china.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I just dealt with that myself.
I mean, I know that there's people out there that really like that desert rose pattern. Is it desert rose?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like
Yes.
And there are collectors out there, but they're harder to find. And yeah, anyway.
Well, we had a house in during the pandemic that had a whole bunch of that desert rose,
Yeah.
and he had sent it off to a company called Replacements, and what they do is they collect china, and sell it to people who need to replace, I broke three plates, I need three new plates. And Replacements sent it right back to him and said, we have too much of it. We
Oh,
changed
gosh.
his mind. Here you go. And we couldn't sell it. And I ended up finding a home for it with someone who was a collector. And she was happy to have it. She already had a bunch of it, but she wanted more. So someday her kids or her realtor are going to be rid of it. But at least we got it out of the house. And it was another thing that I could not haul to the dump. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, your kids, if there is anything we need to say to people, your kids don't want your stuff.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this thing called Swedish death cleaning?
Yes, I have heard that.
I think that's a different podcast. But anyway, we'll have to talk about that at some point.
We'll have to ask our Swedish clients when they get back from
Yes.
the wedding
Yes.
more about that. Um,
Yep.
we didn't really talk about trusts. We talked kind of about the probate, which is a little bit more tricky.
Yep.
Really, what we would advocate for is for people to keep their home in a trust, uh, because we think there's a bunch of tax advantages. Talk to your tax
Yep.
advisor. But when
Yep.
it comes to sale, there is no court involved whatsoever. Uh,
Right.
that you may use a lawyer to help you settle the trust, but you actually don't even need to do that. You just need to have something notarized with the death certificate showing that you're the successor trustee. So
Yep.
this is a scenario. It doesn't always happen this way. Mom and dad create a trust, they buy a house, and then they transfer the title of the house into the trust. So Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner as trustees of homeowner trust dated 2025.
Yep.
And so they become the settlers of the trust and initially the beneficiaries of the trust and the trustees of the trust.
Yep.
And then the trust has a will embedded in it that says when Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner pass away, who the successor trustee is and who the beneficiaries are after them.
Yep.
Typically, their children, not always.
Correct.
And the successor trustee then can do whatever they want. Depending on how the trust is written, and they can buy and sell, and they don't need anybody else's permission. Obviously, if there's multiple beneficiaries, it is best practices to include everybody in that conversation so they're aware of it.
Yeah.
And it's surprising, like I told you, the one story where the three siblings, it was years that it went unsold before they convinced and all three of them were co-trustees, so they all had to sign off on it. But
Which I think is a huge mistake to make, your siblings be co-trustees and, after you're gone and expect them to all get along. I mean, maybe some siblings can do that. I can't imagine that happening in my family because everybody's so different and has different opinions about how things are done. But appoint one, just one.
yeah. Well, so like in my family situation, my parents resigned as the trustees and made me
Mm.
the successor trustee. And
While
largely
they were alive, they
while they were
resigned.
alive.
Yes.
Well, we did it right at the time that my dad was about to pass away from ALS.
Mm.
So it was
Mm.
for my mom's benefit.
Yeah.
But my brother, who's older and smarter than I am in all sorts of different ways, would have made a really great trustee. Except my brother was not reliable to be living domestically, living in Latin America for so long.
Yeah.
So I became the trustee, and so when my mom passed away, my brother and I decided that he wanted to be involved, and so we inherited the property, took it out of the trust, and my brother and I received it into an LLC so that we could make co-decisions. But really, I didn't have to do that. I could have just sold it and then gave him the proceeds. But this is where family dynamics are really interesting. In our case, there's only two of us. We were pretty confident that we could work together. And since you were a real estate agent, you could tell me how well we did working together.
You did very well.
But there are other situations where siblings are cordial with each other
Yes.
and still can't make a decision.
Yes.
There's the unfortunate other circumstances where siblings are just on different pages and they're hostile towards each other. And so
Yep.
it it can freeze an estate rather than just having one person in charge. Even when one person is charged, sometimes when consulting lawyers, they will go to extra effort to do a certain process so that none of the other beneficiaries can claim that you did anything wrong. Uh,
Yeah.
so
We've
yeah,
had every possible scenario over the last many years that we sold real estate. Everything from, a situation like with you and your brother where you made decisions well together that benefited everyone equally, to, siblings fighting and hiring attorneys and, suing each other and not having a very, um, just, yeah, terrible situation. So,
one of the things that was interesting in my own process was I and my brother and I just told you we wanted to co-own the things and make decisions together. So we took
mhm,
it out of the trust. The trust vehicle is meant to just be a temporary vehicle to transfer a estate from one generation to the next.
yeah.
And that's what our lawyers encourage us to do is, all right, receive it and take it out of the trust, and then you could wrap a bow around the trust and have it be done.
Mhm.
But I hear people leave. I mean, like I was giving you an example of the one where the three siblings held in the trust for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so absolutely not giving advice here because I'm not sure what the legal part of that is. But
Mhm.
there is when my brother and I, as soon as my brother and I took it out of the trust, the property tax got reassessed. Now, it wasn't a big deal because we sold it within a few months, less than a year of owning it that way. Actually,
Yeah.
maybe longer than a year. Um, but so the property tax on my parents' house that they bought in 1968 was like $1,200 a year. And
Mm.
when we took it out of the trust, it got reassessed, and the property tax went to over 20,000 a year.
Yikes.
I was a little bitter.
Uh-huh.
My voice is cracked.
You
Um,
do this for a living. You should have
uh,
known that.
well, I wasn't surprised that it happened,
Yeah.
but at
Well,
the same
yeah.
time, it didn't mean that it was not insignificant. Um,
Right.
Uh, but that so you might want to ask that question if you're in the situation. Ask your lawyer who's asking you to take it out of the trust. Can we just sell it while it's still in the trust? We're planning on doing it in this time frame, 4 months, 18 months. And they might tell you that you can keep it there, and that way you keep your property tax lower while you're doing it. Uh,
Yeah.
Not a legal advisor, not a tax advisor. What I'm saying is ask those people the question because
Yeah.
I've heard different people do it different ways.
Yeah. When my dad got sick and it was clear that he was not going to survive his illness, one of the things that I did was take out the trust that he and my mom had prepared because and wanted to make sure that it was in good shape as far as moving forward after he passed away. And one of the things I was shocked to discover was that the attorney they had hired to draw up the trust had done exactly what they asked him to do and never put any of their assets into it. It's called funding a trust. You change the title from holding title as individuals, in their case, community property, and you put it in title and under the name of the trust, plus other assets there are. He had put none of their assets into that trust. And my dad was weeks away from passing away. So thank goodness we recovered from that quickly and got that repaired. But I mean, I've sold houses for people where part of the assets have been funded and part of them haven't. One of them was $167,000 in a checking account that had not been added into the trust, and that had to go to probate because it was not part of the trust. So people need to, how you're supposed to go look at your insurance every year to make sure it's, covering and covering everything it needs to cover. You need to look at your trusts too and make sure that those are in good order, even if you're perfectly healthy.
Well, you know what, where it really gets people regularly is when they go to refinance. So they might put their house in the trust,
Oh,
the title
yeah,
under the trust, but the lender won't lend to the trust. The lender lends to the individual based on the house. And so
yeah,
they'll go and take it out of the trust back into their own names, refinance, and then you're supposed to then after it refinances put it back in the trust. And
yeah,
the bank is fine with that. That's not lender fraud.
yeah.
but people forget to go put it back in the trust, and
Or they don't know.
or they don't know they're supposed to. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it just it causes more problems later on.
Yeah. We
Um,
see it all the time. You look at the preliminary title report and look at the chain of title. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a refi and they didn't put it back in. Oftentimes we can recover from that, but sometimes we can't, you know?
Sometimes when we're doing research on a property and ownership, you'll see that it's that there's been a deed recorded like 10 times. And it's just basically they took it out of the trust, refinanced, put it back in, took it
Yeah.
out, refinanced, put it back in. And
Yep.
so it's just kind of stirring. Hopefully they're not, there was a season when people were using their houses like ATMs, and they would refinance and get cash out, and
Uh-huh.
they get themselves in trouble. But that's a whole different podcast.
So I think when you use the term beneficiaries, and that is literally what it means, it's the people who benefit from the sale of an asset. And I think the funniest or most unusual beneficiary we ever had, and we were partners at the time, was a gentleman who was a big fan of a Christian radio station down in the South, and he left 25% of his assets. He had a will. He didn't have a trust, so it had to go to probate, but he had written a will and he wanted 25% of his assets to go to this little Christian radio station. And do you remember this?
Was this Walnut Boulevard?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yep. And one of the things that you had to do was you had to make contact with the individual to say, oh, by the way, we're sending you some money. And it turned out that this guy who owned this radio station, he was a little podunk, one person radio station, and he only worked 1 day a week. And we would call and call and call. And finally, one day he picked up the phone. He's like, yeah, I'm only in the studio 1 day a week. How can I help you? And it's like, well, I think we're going to help you actually.
And I think that the thing is that beneficiaries don't have to accept the gift.
No,
So that's
no.
part of the reason why you got to contact them. They're like, they might say, I don't want the tax implications of that. Leave me alone.
Yeah, I can't remember what the name of that process is where they have to accept it, but I think he was happy to accept it. It
Yeah,
was probably $100,000.
yeah, something like that.
So for a little radio station, that's a lot of money.
Um, you know,
So,
the buyers of that actually go to my church, and they recently sold and have upsized.
oh, they did.
Yeah,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
Huh.
Um,
All
Anything
right.
else about trusts and we could probably talk about this stuff forever, but kind of from the context from a homeowner. The one more thing I was going to say about trusts is the one of the things that catches us sometimes off guard is our clients is that when you own the property in a trust and you sell it, you have to have a bank account in the name of the trust to receive the funds.
Yes.
And so sometimes our clients are scrambling to go um, open a bank account
Yep.
in the name of the trust because technically the trust is the owner, not the individual, even though you as the beneficiary of the trust that are receiving the money, it has to go into that account first.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, and you can't, it takes a while to open an account in the name of a trust. It's not as simple as just walking in or going online and saying, I want to open up an additional checking account. I recently did that and I just logged on to my bank account and said, I want a new account. And, it asked me to name what it was and I did it. And, within about, 60 seconds, I had a new account. When you open an account in the name of the trust, it takes sometimes 2 weeks to do. So we always have that conversation at the beginning of the transaction because it takes a while.
yeah. The So I guess before we finish up here, so if somebody finds themselves in a situation where a loved one has passed away
Mhm.
and they're receiving the responsibility of dealing with the assets, primarily the house for this conversation, what is what are the order of phone calls do you think they should make? Do you think they should call the lawyer first, the tax
Well, I
first?
think you have a probate designation, so I'm going to ask you that question.
I do have a probate designation. This is true. Uh, uh,
Let's make use of that.
yeah. So the first phone call that we made besides all the loved ones, is to contact. I mean, I was in possession of my parents' trust, and
Hmm.
recommend if you are in possession of the trust or the will, call the lawyer who wrote it. Start there, and if they're not in business anymore, like in my parents' case, they had passed their book of business on to somebody else who happened to be somebody that we worked with professionally. So it was very easy to call that person. It just the circle just happened to go that way.
Hmm.
So make the phone call to the lawyer and they will begin to help you figure out what the next steps are.
Hmm.
That there's, you have to have a birth certificate or a death certificate rather. You've got to then sign an affidavit that you and whatever the right legal instrument is that declares you if it's a trust, the successor trustee. And if it's an administrator or executor, can help you figure out how to go to court and
Hmm.
get that court. It's pretty simple. This is a routine thing. These are not usually contentious things in most family situations,
Hmm.
but part of that step, if there is any ambiguity, the lawyer will get you to the probate court, who will then say, yes, you can go sell the house, or no, you need to notify these people and wait 60 days.
Yeah.
So that's really the first phone call. Um, in the meantime, you can call a real estate professional if you want to begin the conversations, just so you have a game plan and an idea.
Hmm.
Sometimes, if it's the first of two spouses to pass away, you might not be selling, but you still have some work to do, which
Hmm.
might include doing an appraisal for the time of death. And you actually don't need to rush and do that week one because appraisers are really skilled at being able to do
Hmm.
retroactive appraisals, and they can go back
Yeah.
on their multiple listing service and look at the sales, that listings and the sales that happened in the same window of time that your loved
Yep.
one passed away. And
Yep. Very common.
they can establish that value for the capital gains purposes and estate purposes. So first call would be the lawyer. Second one would be to a real estate professional, either directly to an appraiser or to a realtor who can refer you to an appraiser,
Hmm.
and begin to have that conversation about what you might want to do or not do. But really, there's a whole lot of personal work that needs to be done before the realtor does any work. Obviously, there's the personal grieving. We're kind of bypassing that part of it
Yeah.
altogether.
Yeah.
But going through your parents' belongings or the loved ones' belongings is a monumental task, and you need to have some decision-making capacity for how you're going to do that. And we'd be happy to tell you strategies that we found to be successful. There isn't a right way to do it. Every family is going to
Yeah.
deal with it differently, and you should unhook from I'm supposed to. You should be curious and ask questions, but don't feel like you're not trying to discover the right way. You're trying to figure out your way through it.
And unless you are an estate or a real estate professional yourself, you should seek out the advice of estate attorneys and real estate professionals because we've touched very briefly on a few ways to do these sorts of things here, but they can be much more complicated. And there's things that we didn't even talk about today that pop up that people don't know about.
Yeah.
So get advice, hire people who know what they're doing.
Yeah. All right. Last chance for last thoughts before we sign off.
Um, If you have recently bought a house, you should go set up a trust and fund the house into the trust. My best advice, we say it to first time home owners all the time, and to repeat home buyers every time. Do you have a trust? You need a trust.
Yeah. It'll
So,
make it easier on your loved ones.
yeah.
Well, going back to our teaser at the beginning, it is true that in New England and many states in New England and other places, you have to disclose whether the house is haunted or not. And it's creeping into the California vernacular. I have never experienced a ghost. I've never been in a house that I thought was possessed. Going to reserve my comments beyond that. But we have heard legal advice that says if you honestly believe that your house has a ghost, you have to disclose it. I don't know what to say.
I have no words.
I just hope that it's Casper and not a poltergeist.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to test drive a new tagline.
Okay.
And veto it. It's actually in my email signature. Dorothy is right. There's no place like home. We'll, we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.